right, let's get started. Um, I wouldn't know what day it was if I wasn't looking at this screen. So, welcome to the Porter Community Meeting for February 10th, 2022. I'm Carolyn Van Slyke, and today we're just going to be going over mostly the new dependencies proposal. Before we dive into that, though, I just fixed a bug with the operator that kind of made the last version not workable for clusters that used proper storage classes for their volumes. So if you ran into that, I just caught a new release of the operator 040. Give that a try and let me know if it fixes for you. I tested it out on AKS and it seemed to be working, so hopefully that squashed that bug. All right. So after some of you went to the Cnab meeting the last time, I went through all of the spec changes we were proposing for dependencies and tried to lay out an updated proposal for Porter that explains like what the spec changes are actually going to look like in Porter's porter.yaml file, because like the spec is one story and what Porter does usually is pretty different. In the agenda, there's a link to the updated proposal. It's not like shiny and complete yet, but we have like examples in YAML we can kind of look through, and I'm looking for your feedback on if this looks workable or if it's looks really difficult. So this is the same proposal. To be honest, it's been out for a year. The use cases and everything are exactly the same, but I kind of want to just go over them real quick to refresh our memories of the types of use cases I'm aware of when I'm trying to make this work. If you have a use case that we don't talk about right now, speak up and let me know so that we make sure it's covered. So we have, I think it's like 4 or 5. The first one is exclusive resources, where when you install your bundle, you want one of your dependencies to be just for you. So for example, it's a Redis cache, and when I install my app, it should get its own Redis cache. We shouldn't try to reuse an existing installation. It should always get its own. And this is how Porter works today. Every time it installs dependencies or installs a bundle with dependencies, it'll make a new installation for any of those dependencies. So one, we just want to make sure that we can still do that. Another one is global resources. If you're not familiar with 1.0 of Porter or pre-release, we have the concept of namespaces now, which allows you to kind of segment your installations of bundles into kind of smaller scopes. So you could have a namespace for staging, you could have a namespace for production, or just Carolyn's deployments, it doesn't really matter. And then there's also the concept of the empty namespace, which is kind of the default, which is we kind of treat it as global. And so in some cases, you may have cluster-wide installations that are useful for everyone. And when you install a bundle, you'd like to be able to just pick up and use them if they're available. So for example, I'm going to install a Kubernetes operator, like, the Porter operator, to be honest, doesn't matter. But maybe, or the Helm operator, and it was designed to work with Flux installed on the cluster. But it doesn't actually configure Flux. It's just going to go, I'm going to be doing things, and there better be Flux somewhere watching for these changes that I'm making to the cluster. So I should be able to just say that I need something and then ensure that it's going to be in my environment and reuse it even at the global scope. Then we have application resources, where I have an app that's composed of multiple bundles, and each one of those bundles wants to depend on the same thing. Like, the microservice one is a pretty easy one to think about, where I've got 4 different little apps that all want to use the same shared database, like a common users table, things like that. But I want to be able to install any of these bundles either as a suite, right, and it installs all 4 at one go, or I should be able to install like one and then tack on another one a week later. Because everyone has kind of different deployment topologies. But the trick we want is that it knows that database is its application's database, and it gets to reuse it. So we'd like to be able to do that. This one's really critical, actually. Most resources in people's environments weren't provisioned by Porter, and they're not going to be ever. So we need to be able to pick up resources in Porter that were provisioned separately. So like, I have a physical F5 load balancer somewhere and I want to be able to use it, or like a database that, is on like real hardware in my office or in my data center, and it wasn't provisioned by Porter, but when I install other things that could use it, I'd like for them to be able to detect and use key pieces of metadata about that, like the connection string for the database. So we need a way for new Porter bundles that are installed to be able to take advantage of existing infrastructure and kind of use a lot of the wiring that Porter will do for you, like connecting an output and things like that, and allowing the bundle to use it when it's installed. And then the last case is the concept that bundles have interfaces, and some bundles are interchangeable. A bundle that installs MySQL, right, at the end of the day, it's going to give me a connection string, a username, a database name, things like that, port, whatever. And whether it was installed by Helm in a cluster, or it's like an on-premise installation, or it's one of the cloud providers' database, like as a service solutions, I don't care. I can use any of it. So I just need to say there are certain characteristics of a bundle, and as long as it meets those characteristics, it can be used as my dependency. So that when I'm writing the bundle, I can write it platform agnostic, essentially. I can say I need a MySQL database, and when someone actually goes to install your app, they can say, that's cool, I'm going to use Azure MySQL, I'm going to use Google's MySQL, or RDS, something like that. And it should be able to just work without making flavors of bundles for every infrastructure that you could be deploying with. Are there any questions so far, or other use cases that we may be missing, or like variants of these that we want to keep our eyes on? Okay, I'm gonna go with these are the best use cases ever, and you love them all, and we're good. Okay, so let's look at what this looks like with the Cnab spec changes. Some of it's gonna look the same, but you can see it got a lot bigger. We still have dependencies, and in V1 we have a required section, and it's going to be a list of bundles you depend on, where you give it a name to refer to the bundle, like refer to the dependency within your bundle. So maybe you call it MySQL or Postgres, or my cool load balancer, whatever. And then it'll have a section called bundle underneath it that is essentially criteria for Porter to decide if Porter's looking at any particular bundle, right? Could it be used? Essentially to satisfy this dependency. Reference we had before, And what we're going to start doing is, instead of being like, that's the only bundle reference we can use, it's going to become the default implementation for that dependency. So it'll be a full reference, including a version number, okay? And it's basically like, what did the author test and use? It's not going to be required, but I mean, it'll make everyone's lives easier if you provide a default implementation, so that if Porter can't find something, it'll always have something to fall back on and use. And this has always been in the spec, but Porter never implemented it, which is the ability to specify a version range of acceptable versions to go with this reference. What this will allow Porter to do is look for newer patches of your default implementation, so you can keep up to date with security fixes, essentially, without having to re-release the bundle every time its dependency puts out a new version. It's optional, you don't have to use it, right? If you want to have your bundle be fixed to a specific dependency version, go for it. Otherwise, you can do like 1.x, for example, or 1.2.x, and either, you know, stay on the latest minor version or maybe stay on the latest patch version. And Porter will look up your reference bundle, essentially, and go, are there new patches? I'll use that instead of whatever's specified in the bundle if it meets this version. So that's kind of some of the existing things. They're always in the spec. We're going to start supporting them a little differently now. And then the other piece is the concept of an interface. You don't have to specify this, but if you do, it gives Porter more leeway in what bundle or installation it uses to match this dependency. So what the interface can define is you can either point to an existing bundle and be like, any bundle that looks like this one, reuse it. That's one option. The other option is you can just say what the bundle should look like in general. So it should have a parameter for username, or it should take a credential for your cube config, things like that. Things that you're going to do in your bundle when you're connecting to that dependency and kind of sending it parameters and credentials and taking outputs out of it. One thing that we're going to try to do is Porter is just going to have like a base interface. We'll pay attention to how you use the bundle and your dependencies inside the templating language. So, like bundle.dependencies.MySQL outputs connection string. Like, we'll pick up on that you're using the connection string coming out of this dependency and just kind of add that to the interface that we're going to match on. But if you need more control over it, you can be really specific either by just giving a bundle or just kind of giving nudges in certain ways. So for the most part, you won't specify these. This one's kind of neat though. No one ever agrees on what to call outputs, parameters, and credentials, right? One person's going to call it dbcon, someone else is going to call it connection string, somebody else is going to use camel case, somebody else snake case, etc. It's kind of an awkward problem to deal with, and this is my suggestion for it. This isn't from the spec, really. Is that instead of relying on the exact name, we can take advantage of another field that's defined on that output parameter credential and use that to kind of indicate what that parameter credential or output represents. So for example, I could set an ID on any bundles I define and say that the output for my connection string represents a MySQL 5.7 connection string, or it represents a Cosmos DB connection string or something like that. And then if we can get authors to kind of, regardless what names they pick, if they kind of indicate what it's used for using that, maybe we would put up like a common page on Porter's website or the Cnab website that kind of says, here are some things we've agreed upon as a group to use for bundles. Porter could then use that to map a dependency that uses one name for an output, but the bundle, you know, it needs to work with 6 different dependencies and they all call their output something differently. Something like this will allow us to map it up and still make them compatible. So I don't think it'll force people to do this, but anyone who's interested in having their bundle used more widely, right? And for in-house stuff, like this probably isn't relevant at all. But when we're talking about, you know, publishing a bundle to like an open Docker registry and you're trying to encourage people to use it, I think there'll kind of be a little bit of a motivation to pick some type of URI scheme for these and start using them across people's implementations of certain services and resources and bundles. I'm going to stop there for a second because that was a lot.
I think this is great. I think the ID especially.
Questions on that before we move forward, or if there's anything that seems a little fuzzy?
I really like the ID concept and how that could be linked to a list of existing well-known.
I'm so sorry, I missed what you said. I had the wrong speaker turned on.
Yeah, I was just saying, I really like the ID concept on the outputs of some kind of like, you know, that can be linked to like well-known, already defined output types that people can agree on. This is, and yeah, like this is the kinds of things we've been thinking about, is being able to use bundles more as Lego pieces that we can just click together.
Yeah, exactly. That is what we're looking for. And
yeah,
hopefully all the Lego pieces don't have to be from Lego. They could be from Duplo too.
I was just about to say, yeah, maybe we're making it easy
together.
enough for Duplo. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So there's one more piece. This is absolutely not in the spec whatsoever. This is like Porter flavor that we're putting on top as well. And it's configuration about when Porter creates an installation to represent this dependency, okay? Or it reuses an installation. This is some configuration for that. First one is labels. When you have labels set here on the installation, when Porter makes a new installation to represent this dependency, it'll apply these labels. Where that comes in handy is that you can use those labels to identify existing installations to figure out if you want to reuse that installation. You can kind of encode information about what the installation represents. Like, is it just for my application? Things like that. Is it just for a specific environment? You know, all sorts of stuff. You can kind of get that in the label, and then we can use that later when we're matching against existing installations. So the first time through, there's no installation to use. We make a new one, we apply these labels. The second time through, we install another bundle, and we're going to look at the criteria here, the installation criteria. And the author can kind of influence how Porter matches to existing installations. So one is match interface. By default, Porter's going to try to match the bundle. If there's a bundle like example / Nginx, okay? It's only going to reuse installations that are based on that bundle. Not the exact version, but just based on that bundle that meet like the version criteria. But you could decide as an author that it's actually okay to be more loose in matching and go, as long as the interface matches, as long as it generates outputs that I need, or I'm expecting to pass it in certain, no, it would just be outputs. If it's going to generate certain outputs I need, I'm fine to reuse it. By default, all of these are false. So what's going to happen is it will expect the bundle to match up on an installation that it's deciding to reuse. The other piece is namespace. So again, we have like global namespaces, and then you could install in a specific namespace, like Carolyn's, dev environment. By default, we'll match either at the global level or in your namespace where you're currently installing. And we'll prefer reusing installations that are in your same namespace. So if you have MySQL globally, and you have MySQL in your namespace, we'll use the one in your namespace first if it's available. If you want to change that behavior and go, I never want to match globally. For this bundle, it doesn't make sense to match globally. You can turn that off. And the other piece is the label matching. By default, we try to match the labels specified here with an existing installation. If you want to turn that off, you can. So this is all kind of like, I started with like what you would specify, but let's walk through now what that looks like for each one of the use cases. So you can see like how much of this, because it's kind of big, how much of this you're actually specifying for a dependency. So for exclusive resources, we're going to rely on a little trick with labeling in order to get us a unique installation of our dependency every time we're installed. And the way we're going to do that is, so we're going to pick a default implementation for a bundle, like Redis specifically 102. Okay. And then we're going to go, okay, when you create the installation, label it with the name of the installation. So if I'm installing WordPress, the label would be installation and the value would be WordPress. If someone went to install a new installation of the WordPress bundle and now it's called My Blog, the label wouldn't match because it would be looking for label My Blog and the existing one would have WordPress. And so that would force making a new instance of that bundle. And then here I decided, I don't think this is really necessary for this example, but you could be super specific and say only match in my namespace. Installation is unique everywhere, so I don't think that should be a problem, but I was kind of just demonstrating everything we could specify here. So this is how we keep Porter's current behavior, essentially. For reusing global resources, it looks even, it's more straightforward. Just say what bundle you want to use. Optionally allow a version range. And if Porter finds it, if it finds another bundle at the global level for Flux v2, it'll go, great, that dependency has been satisfied, and it'll just reuse it and move on. Now let's say you want to have your microservice scenario and they all share that common database. In this case, we're going to use a label again to give us that more selective reuse criteria. But instead of setting it to the exact installation name, we're just going to set it to our app. So any installation of our app in the current namespace would reuse this Postgres installation if it finds it.
Is it intentional that you have the version in the reference and in the version attribute under bundle? Like one is for loose matching and one is get that explicit one?
This gives Porter absolute guarantee that there's a bundle out there that we can use that'll meet this criteria.
Okay.
Version says, can I use any other matches, and this may be like a user setting then. Do I want to automatically try to match the latest or not, right? Or should I just use exactly what it asks for? That may be like a client configuration setting, but I want to guarantee that we have like a specific bundle and I can get that bundle's definition and kind of use that for more like matching and hints. I don't want to get in a situation where people said Postgres v2, and they don't specify any tag that we know Porter can actually pull.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I think it would just cause us a lot more work to implement this, because then we're always going to have to go hit a registry, try every single one, not even start from a minimum version and try to figure it out.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I think that tagging can be really loose in the registries and how that's managed.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of look at it as when the bundle author writes this and tests it with a dependency, just put that in, as this is something I know will work, and then use the interface in the version to allow other tags to match.
Has the potential to allow the bundle author to know also, oh, this reference went away that you were explicitly expecting. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks.
If someone yoinked this version, I would expect Porter to look for another one, but ideally, if we can grab it and get more information about what we know will work with this bundle, I think it'll be helpful for us instead of having to immediately jump to scanning a registry for potentially a lot of tags, This one is going to look a little different. We're going to use some shenanigans and tricks here. So this is where I have an existing resource that was not deployed with Porter. There's no existing installation for it, but I would like other bundles when they're installed to be aware of that resource and be able to reuse it and pick up key pieces of metadata about it. So in my example, I have a shared dev SQL server that everyone is using. Okay. And I'd like that when they install applications that need a database, that it can pick it up, know that it's there, and grab its connection string and just start using it. So my hack, workaround, clever, I don't know, probably not clever, is the system administrator essentially for this environment would make a bundle that doesn't install anything, doesn't do anything, but what it does do is allows the bundle to remember a connection string. And then if anyone else does an installation that needs this SQL server as a dependency, it'll be able to pick it up and use that connection string without a whole bunch of extra work. Or like every dev shouldn't have to know that there's a shared SQL server out there. The person who manages this Porter environment can set this up once and it just will work for everyone else. So we have this kind of placeholder bundle that'll just act as a way to hand out the connection string. And then the dependency looks the same as before. I'm going to rely on something, I don't know, I'm making up things all the time, but we're going to pretend there's a bundle called Azure SQL Server. And it's going to expose a database connection string. We're going to use ID here so that in different environments, it could pick up different implementations of a SQL server. And I'm only going to match on the interface. And so that'll allow people to swap implementations of this. Because all I need at the end of the day is a connection string. And this will be able to work, and it'll pick up this installation right here and get its connection string and use it. And the person who is installing the bundle that relied on this may not even be aware that that dependency was kind of not really Porter managed. It's not really realistic to expect Porter to manage everything. I imagine it'll always be managing a minority of resources. So I think this will help us not create this stark divide between Porter and maybe another part of the company is using just Terraform or something like that. So this is what the commands would look like. I'm jumping into the commands a little bit because it's kind of a bit more of a workflow to make this work. This would be the system administrator. And they'd go, okay, I'm going to install this fake bundle essentially that I made, and I'm going to pass in some top secret connection string. And the way Porter works is it'll just remember that. And anytime someone asks for the connection string associated with this installation, it'll get back whatever you passed in. And if you need to update it, just rerun the command, run an upgrade, pass in a new connection string value, and the installation will have it. And then
Can I ask you something about that real quick?
Of course, yeah.
You triggered me there. You
Oh
said
man.
top secret connection string, and this is a parameter. One of the things about, like, credentials, you can't pass a credential in via the command line. You have to put in a credential set.
Yep.
Are you saying, maybe I just missed that in the example, but would requiring that as a credential set and leveraging secret store, that sounds totally doable with that kind of wrapper.
You could still do this
bundle you're talking about. Yeah.
You could still do this with credentials. This was just for the briefest
just for
example of one way to achieve this.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Another way, make a credential set, point to a location in Vault. We're still working on this part of the feature, but it'll be there for 1.0, which is that we'll remember that it's an output, but we'll store the output in your Vault. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then when someone else needs to reference it, we'll grab it from the Vault, and it won't actually be in Porter's database.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, totally. Nice. I was just going for like, what could I show you in one line?
Right, and I made that twice as long for you to talk about, so sorry.
No, that's fine. So the last one, this kind of shows the same thing, but I just want to talk about it a little bit more, is the bundle interface again. So I want to be able to rely on any MySQL. I don't care. I don't even provide a default implementation, in fact. Maybe I'm allowing my customers to pick what platform, like maybe they installed AWS and you support installing to Azure and DigitalOcean and Google, Maybe you don't even want to provide a default implementation because it's just, there's no good way to do it without favoring someone or things like that. You can just say, I need MySQL. And when someone goes to install this, we're going to need to either match something or they're going to be prompted to say, what bundle do you want to use for MySQL? So the first time we're in a fresh environment, there's nothing in there. Porter's not going to match on an existing installation. Porter's going to say, hey, before you install this, you need to know that it requires MySQL. You need to pick a bundle that implements MySQL and let us know that you want to use that. Then the second time you install something in the same environment, it'll pick up that installation and reuse it. And so this is just kind of a way to help, again, reinforce that we can make, platform agnostic bundles and hopefully not have a terrible user experience then for trying to piece together what to use later when they didn't provide a default implementation. Long term, there's other things we can do where like a system administrator can register and say, if you're looking for a bundle that looks like this, maybe we can pre-register, hey, in this environment, we're using RDS, something like that. But I was keeping that out of this proposal because I didn't want to complicate things. It's something we could think about later. So let's just talk real quick about bundle interfaces, just again to make sure we all kind of get how it's going to work. Because I hope people really make use of this. I think it'll allow us to make much more, like a wider ecosystem where you're way more likely to be able to use someone else's bundle instead of having to remake bundles for essentially the same thing, just to make it match up with what you want to use. The way we match is with that version range, and this will probably be controlled by a client setting. So one client could decide, I always want to try to stay on the latest patch. Another client could say, just use the default implementation. I don't want to stray from what was tested or what was used in that bundle. So we'll try to match the version range, and we'll do that by like going to the registry of the default bundle and asking for additional tags and seeing if those tags meet both the version criteria and the interface, like how we're going to use the bundle. At the command line, users should be able to override what bundle is used for dependency. So in the example above, like Porter forced the issue. There's no default implementation. So, we kind of said up front when you went to run it, you have to tell us what to use. They could decide for anything, though, that I don't want to reuse an installation, or I specifically want to reuse this one because maybe there's 3 choices in that environment. Or I want to use this specific bundle. Maybe you've written your own alternative implementation for something in your environment. You could always just kind of swap that in. And then when Porter goes to reuse an existing implementation, we're going to match against the bundle unless you say otherwise, and then we'll only match against the interface. I think everything else we kind of walked through. So the other thing I want to show, and this is now going to be in the spec, which is great, is the ability to make connections between your dependencies and pass outputs from one of your dependencies into like an input as a parameter credential into another dependency. And then it also allows you to more explicitly wire up the parameters and credentials defined on your bundle, on the parent bundle, and pass them to credentials and parameters on a dependency so that you can be super specific about what creds we actually give to dependencies. And we're only going to give credentials to a dependency that we explicitly pass in. So what it allows you to do is you could have a bundle that's your dependency, and you may have a very sensitive credential going to the parent bundle. It won't get passed to the dependency unless you explicitly say so. So it'll allow us kind of to limit the exposure of credentials to dependencies. So in this case, my parent bundle has a kubeconfig credential. And then I have a Redis dependency, and I'm going to pass that kubeconfig to it as well. And this allows for the names to be different. I use the same name here, but it could have been 2 different credential names, and this will allow you to map them and line them up as well. In this next example, I have an application that I'm relying on, and then I'm also relying on a MySQL database. And part of what I'm showing here is that it used to be that Porter relied on this order as the execution order. This is not the execution order anymore. Because as you can see, my app depends on the connection string that's coming out of the MySQL bundle. Porter is going to pick up on that and run the MySQL bundle first. Then take the output from that and pass it in to the connect the conster parameter for my app. So Porter should essentially figure out the entire execution order for you based on its usage and how everything is kind of being put together. And you won't be able to specify anymore, which one comes first. That was always kind of a hack because we didn't really resolve a dependency graph. So in the remaining time, I would just love to get thoughts on does this seem flexible, or does this seem a lot of information for a bundle author to provide up front?
It's realistic. I don't know. Maybe it is a lot, but I think it's realistic of what you have to actually deal with.
Yeah. Does this fit
and
well
correct me
with
if I'm
how
wrong
you're-
here.
Does this fit well with how you want to use dependencies?
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I
Okay.
mean, the one thing I was going to mention here is I'm assuming we can substitute reference by the IDs instead of output names and things of
Yes.
that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, no, yeah, I like, I was looking at like use cases of like, how do we give a Kubernetes platform to a team, but manage individual namespaces for team members or something like that. And
Hmm.
this seems very much in line with being able to kind of compose that together via dependencies. So yeah, no, this is great.
I'm so glad
Yeah,
you brought up the ID thing because actually I just realized at the spec level it's not taking ID into account here, so I'll make sure that that gets tweaked. Yeah.
The
being able to create like a shim bundle to add in non-porter managed infrastructure and have that in the porter ecosystem like it was porter managed is really, really useful too.
I like your term for that, a shim bundle. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
that's,
steal
I mean,
that.
that's always been kind of a shortcoming in my mind of Terraform is it's all or nothing.
Yeah, adopting existing resources can be awkward. I mean, I went the route
I've
of just
actually
making it manual, but
to solve problems like this in the past, I've actually grabbed the DAG library out of Terraform to solve some dependency graph stuff. So
oh my
it's
goodness.
it's like when it's great to see acknowledging the dependency aspects of things as well here. So
Okay, great.
I think that's a powerful thing.
Excellent. I mean, I'm glad it sounds like it'll hit the mark of what we need. Because gosh, I really want to see some bundles that have a more realistic dependency graph.
And
Multiple levels deep with interdependencies between the dependencies. Because I know that's what a lot of deployments actually need. You know.
when we were first evaluating Porter, that's one thing we did as an exercise of like, what does it look like to craft things built on other bundles? And yeah, we hit how many layers deep we can go, and then said, okay, well, we can use other strategies to just assemble a new bundle out of parts from other ones. But this kind of makes all that go away and gives separation of responsibility to the right bundle authors and owners.
Yeah.
Let me ask too, like, and I haven't really thought this through, but the whole idea of a bundle author saying, I guess this can or cannot match on interface and things of that nature, is that something that the end user can or should be able to override at runtime?
They can. They can.
They can. Okay.
Yeah. So let's say that a bundle author was kind of being strict, you know,
Yeah.
and they said, this is the bundle that I think should be used with mine as a dependency, and they don't allow for just interface matching, right? It was a little too restrictive, perhaps. The user can always just, on the command line, provide the name of the bundle they want to use
Yeah.
or an existing installation, and as long as Porter can make it work, it'll use it.
And actually, that's a good point. Like to Stephen, I don't remember if he called it shim bundle or what, but you could actually potentially put a shim bundle around someone else's bundle that
Yeah.
put IDs in, that made it more flexible about working with interfaces and things of that nature. Sounds like, at least.
That's kind of neat. I'm just writing that down. So you wrapping it to kind of add in some of those best practices that
Yeah,
the original bundle
yeah,
was missing.
right. I've never had to take someone else's code and make best practices around it before, but maybe I'll have to in the future. So
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think a lot of this will depend on what type of guidance we provide. You know, um, if people are left to make bundles before we've said how we want them to be made, and we don't have like some predefined IDs or a really easy process for people to say, hey, I'm going to use this and I think it should have an ID, and be able to kind of like get that in a place where other authors can see it, people won't use it. If we kind of stay on top of it and recognize it's going to be a need and someone needs to help facilitate this, then I think people are way more likely to do that, especially if all the docs nudge you, in that direction and kind of lay out, do you want people to use your bundle? If you want your bundle to be used by the most, wide range of users, then you're going to be wanting setting IDs,
Yeah. And like we've been working on a workflow engine that deploys bundles for people. We just finished prototyping a VS Code extension that lets you put a JSON file into a repo and it automatically picks up on that and deploys the bundle for the user and gets outputs back. But even with all that, I go back to everyone I talk to and I say, it's about the ecosystem around bundle content and facilitating best practices for people to take what they've done in Terraform, Pulumi, Ansible, whatever, and here's a structure for getting that into a bundle quickly. So,
yeah,
and anything to help invest in building up a bundle ecosystem, I'm interested in, because it's the content that is really going to drive this. So,
oh my gosh, I mean, I am 100% with you on this. I feel like it's a really big gap that all the bundles I've seen are in-house, and they're you're deploying your own things and you're relying on your own bundles. I haven't seen a lot of like public published bundles that are intended to be reused by other people, like a Redis bundle or a MySQL bundle. You know what I mean? And it'd be amazing if we could get like CNCF artifact hub, or maybe I think GitHub Container Registry was thinking about doing this too, is officially supporting bundles and making it so that they're more discoverable. I don't know if you've ever looked at a registry. It's really hard to tell the difference between a bundle and an image.
that's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
publishing the GitHub Container Registry, but not, you can't tell. You just see
Yeah,
two containers.
You can't tell, and there's no like Docker hub
Yeah.
to kind of find those bundles to reuse them. Like, gosh, if there was a bundle hub or something, or artifact hub, if we could get bundles recognized as artifacts on CNCF's hub and make them discoverable, I think that would be really great. If anyone's interested in somehow trying to move that
in a
forward.
similar vein, in a similar vein, I don't think it would be a huge challenge to have something that could inspect an existing Terraform module and create a bundle wrapper for it that just exposes variables and outputs from a Terraform module. And then suddenly you're bringing lots of Terraform.
We've had that as a wish list, like basically Porter create, and you could point it at existing assets. And if you have a Terraform mixin on your computer, the Terraform mixin go, I know how to turn that into a bundle, and then just do it for you. Yeah, cool. That's very possible. Cool. I'm gonna take some of your feedback here and make sure it gets back into the Cnab spec. And then otherwise, development is actually underway. I'm prototyping all of this because we're not going to finalize the spec until we've seen this working in Porter, so we don't end up with something really awkward that can't actually be implemented, as spec. But yeah, we've already got the dependency graph resolution started and going. If people are interested in helping to contribute, there's a whole bunch of pieces that have to happen for this. So, we'll be talking later too. So this may be a good place to chip in, actually, because there's a ton of work here.
Stephen and I both started diving into the operator code. I started playing around with it to just see what it looked like to add a credential set resource yesterday. So I moved from learning JavaScript to working on Go. Yeah.
I've started on credential set because what I realized is that the current controller for installation, like half of it is reusable for credential set and parameter set.
I was wondering. Yeah. I got to the point of just doing a 2-porter document for a credential set CRD to a something that could be run by a credential apply or whatever it is.
Because it feels like we have this kind of pattern we could use for the operator interacting with Porter, where we have a piece of code that just understands how to spawn a job that runs Porter, right?
Yeah.
And then each one of the individual
That's where I thought you were
controllers-
going with that after I
Yeah.
actually got into the code.
Yeah, each one of the individual controllers could then just say, hey, here's the file to put on the file system in front of Porter, and this is the command to run. Yeah.
Cool.
I don't know if you have experience with Kubernetes events at all. That would be the other thing.
Ingesting
that
them,
we need.
not creating them.
Yeah, I know we're not creating them. Yeah, trying to figure out what we should be doing for a lot of this is
I learned
tricky.
JavaScript really quickly, or TypeScript, in order to write a VS Code extension. So I just figure it out as I go. So.
I mean, that's what we all do. Deep
Yeah.
down inside, we all just Google it. All right, great. If there's anything else people wanted to cover before we wrap up for today?
Yeah, this is great. I don't even know if I've formed this question, but I'm just trying to think of the inverse. You know, if you're resolving dependencies for installation, what about when you uninstall a bundle? Maybe it's too big a problem, but if you uninstall a bundle that has dependencies to an app that that no longer has any other dependencies, I'm wondering if there's any mechanism we could use or we could query for an app.
Like a dependency isn't needed anymore?
Yeah, if a bundle was installed because due to a dependency requirement, then when you uninstall the parent, the original bundle, you might want to clean up all the dependencies.
Yeah. We need that. I feel like that's the next step after this is the concept of like thinking about the life cycle of all the dependencies.
Yeah, I mean, it sort of suggests having reference counts, which like would be horrible.
It's the whole Terraform destroy lifecycle aspect of things, the kind of dependencies you'd see there, right?
Yeah.
I think similar use cases.
One thing that I haven't mentioned, but I think we're going to need so that we don't do reference counting, is that Porter needs to keep track that this specific installation is one of my dependencies, And then when upgrades occur, when uninstalls occur, we're going to need to decide both what we're going to let people configure and what the default's going to be. Do we upgrade our dependencies with us? Do we uninstall our dependencies with us? And this allows us also to say, this originally was a dependency for X and X is gone. And then we can sweep for things like this and give users control over what they want to have happen. Cleaning up some things like a Redis cache, sure. Cleaning up a database that has real data in it, maybe not, So that's kind of the next step. If you have ideas about that, maybe we could start an issue and start talking about them. I don't have as many concrete use cases for this. Just a fuzzy idea that we've got to deal with it.
Yeah, there was a little more than a fuzzy idea in my mind right now.
Yeah. No, I more meant like I don't know what the default should be. Can we help at all with this, or is it always going to be?
I mean, there's all kinds of like behaviors.
Yeah.
Like create a new parent if it needs to satisfy a child dependency, so you're not messing up anything that's currently relying on an existing parent. There could be different behaviors of whether or not to create something new or not. That's a dependency versus trying to reuse something. That's a dependency.
That's a really good point that I don't think has ever come up before, is that we know the dependency structure and we could figure out when you're deleting an installation that you're about to ruin something, because it's still being used by someone as a dependency, and kind of catching that and warning about it or giving people other options. Yeah.
Worth a review of behaviors in the Terraform lifecycle block.
Always.
And some of the different behaviors that they've learned over the years there.
How did my job become ripping off Terraform? We need to. need to rethink some things here.
Was it Picasso, right? You steal, right?
I mean, that's
Great
that's
artists
how we
steal.
get everything done.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'll make an issue just as a placeholder for the life cycle question, because I think that I'd really love if anyone wants to kind of just contribute thoughts and scenarios, that would be incredibly helpful. All right, thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thanks. Bye.
Excellent. Thanks.